joining me here today with the Brooklyn Public Library. I'll be talking about fundraising for your nonprofit. This is obviously a very broad topic, so I'll be speaking very general and answer any questions that you might have, since again, there's about 12 of us here and everybody's nonprofit may be something different and completely different industries. So I'll try to give a few examples of some common nonprofits. So yes, a little bit about me is that I am the founder of Operation Prom National Network, like Randy had mentioned. We are the nonprofit organization that provides free prom dresses and tuxedos to students in need. We are based here in New York. So we cover a large market of New York City, Brooklyn, Queens. We're here in Westchester. I'm in Westchester right now. And I started the organization 22 years ago. So it's been quite a while. I have a lot of experience in fundraising, and what works for me may or may not work for your nonprofit. So I'm going to give you an overview since I've also consulted with and have worked for a lot of different nonprofit organizations. So let's get to it. An introduction to grants, probably something that you hear a lot about. Maybe just kind of some basic questions I can answer for you about what grants are and how do you find grants, what can they be used for. So first, what I like to tell people is there are two different types of grants that are restricted and grants that are unrestricted. So what exactly are those and what are you looking for? So for things like unrestricted funds, right? If you get a grant and there's no restriction on how you can use it, then you can use that grant to pay for things like salaries, rent, and other things that you may need. But then there are very restricted grants, and more so common are restricted grants because they are usually for specific programs. So when you apply for a grant, you may have to explain exactly what you're going to use the money for. And then when you get the grant, you have to use it for those reasons, right? You can't use it for something else, for a different program that you decide or a different project that you decide. So be sure that when you find these grants, you're reading through all of the eligibility criteria to see what you can apply for, what you could use the money for. Who awards grants? So there's different ways that we can look for grants, right? We can look to foundations, we can look at corporations, and we can look at the government to see what kind of funding is out there. And then it says, where can I find these grants? What category does your nonprofit fall under? For example, food insecurity, education, disaster relief, employment, economy, environmental, etc. right? So I always tell people, if you're just going to do like a Google search, that's fine, right? But make sure you're very specific in your search. Are you looking for corporate grants? Well, what kind of nonprofit do you have? Are there corporations that might have a similar mission to what your nonprofit is about? My organization is a fashion organization, right? So we provide prom dresses and tuxedos. So typically a lot of our funders are corporations. They may give us money. They may also give us product, which is known as in-kind donations. And that's another great way that helps our organization. If we're getting a fashion company to donate shoes, dresses, accessory items, other things that we also give to students like cosmetics and toiletry items, things like that. So sometimes we look to corporations to see, is their mission aligned with ours? Foundations, sometimes like family foundations and other funds, might be a little bit trickier to find, but we'll talk about where to find them. And of course, government funds. So this could be as hyper local as your local community, your local elected officials, to something greater such as state or federal funding. But it really would depend on your organization and who your target market is, right? When I started the organization 20 years ago, I was just focusing on Westchester. In fact, I was really just focusing on like Yonkers, Mount Vernon, and New Rochelle. So it wasn't until we expanded that we then started working with the Westchester County government, right? So researching grants. So consider for-profit companies, like I said, with similar missions and interests. Connect with your local community groups and government agencies. Research online, grant search by your area, who you serve, the services you offer, resources and products that you supply. I also have here a link for the New York Public Library, but I would assume that the Brooklyn Public Library also has a nonprofit database software. I think we might have talked about that in the past, Randy.
We did talk about that in the past. It is changing its name, but we do have the foundation directory available on the library's computers at Central. You do need to come to the Central branch of BPL to use it.
Yes, that's right. And now I do remember that. You have to go to the library and use the database, but that database is incredible because it will be able to help you find grants related to your mission, and you don't have to pay for the membership for the database because usually there is a fee. So, great way for you to get to the library and do some research without it costing any money. Once you find these grants, right, again, like I said, see if you're eligible, read through the criteria. A lot of people ask me this, so, feel free to jump in the chat if you have a question. But a lot of people ask me, can I write a grant? Can I ask for money if I'm not a 501c3 just yet? I'm still waiting for my tax exemption. You cannot write grants yet. So you have to wait until you have your tax exemption to apply for the grant, because grant application portals ask you for everything. So here's a list of some things that you'll need to just write the initial, first page or two of the grant, right? So mission, services that you provide, what will the funding be used for, what is your annual budget? So they'll want you to upload a budget for the year. And if that budget includes things like salaries, marketing, rent, you should include that. But there should also be a separate budget that's going to show what your project is or your program is going to cost. And that might also include some salaries or some people that you have to pay for. But again, those should be two separate things. So your annual budget and also what is this program going to cost? And you might be asking to cover the entire annual budget, right? Or to cover a percent of your annual budget. Maybe there is just one specific program. And that's fine, just as long as you're specific in noting that as you type through the grant. The grant, again, is going to ask you for a lot of information. You're going to be answering a lot of questions. For example, impact data related to who and how many you serve. So for newer organizations that may be listening in, or you're just starting, maybe you haven't even started the work yet, right? Where do you get this data? Try getting data as soon as you start, right? If you're collecting items, like we collect dresses and tuxedos and other accessory items, start tracking that inventory, whether it's, food related items, school supplies, maybe you're collecting school supplies, maybe you're doing children's clothing, whatever it is, food, anything. Start tracking how many things that you have coming in through the donation and how much is going out. Even if you've only been serving people for a month or two, that's still data, that's still important information, okay? And then who are these people, right? The demographics of who you're serving. So grants want you to be very specific. Sometimes they'll ask you for categories: children, certain ages, teens, right? Might be separate from children, youth, young adults, things like that, up to senior citizens, right? So you want to be very specific and explain exactly who your demographics are. Yes, we have a question.
We do have a question. Egypt asks, what's the difference between donating to a nonprofit versus a for-profit startup? What's the difference between donations and investments?
So they are two completely different things. So if you're a for-profit business, right, you're going to be making money, you're selling a product or a service, right? And you're just starting up. Anybody that invests in your business maybe is going to be getting a percentage of your equity. They're going to own like an equity in your business if they're giving you money. So that's totally different from how a nonprofit operates, because nonprofits don't take a profit, right? So, and we don't have, stakeholders that own, or invest a percentage into the business. If anybody makes a donation to you, whether they give you $5 or $5,000, they're expecting a tax deductible receipt that they can use on their taxes that they made that, that contribution. If I'm investing in your business $5,000, I don't need a tax deductible letter. I need to know, what am I getting back, in return? Or am I getting equity? Is this a loan, right? So hopefully that kind of explains, answers your question. But if you have a follow-up question, please feel free to put it in the chat. And I'll continue on here. So also geography. So again, like when I started my business, it was mostly in Westchester. And as we expanded the organization, we started going to other states as well. So we have chapters in New Jersey, in Connecticut, in Florida. So again, who are you serving? You want to be very clear in the grant process. Who is your board of directors and staff? So again, if you're just starting out, and that's fine, maybe you haven't even completed your 501c3 paperwork, or maybe you're waiting to get it back. But in New York State, legally, we need to have three members when we file for a nonprofit organization. So hopefully you have selected yourself and 2 other wonderful people that are going to help you grow the organization. And then maybe as you continue your work, you'll add more people on your board of directors. So in a grant, one of the things that you'll have to upload is who your board of directors are, and also who your staff is. So if there are any part-time staff or full-time staff, if the grant wants that information, you'll have to upload that as well. I've also seen that some grantors are also asking for the diversity of your board and the diversity of your staff. So they want to know male, female, they want to know ethnicity. So that might also be some information that you'll need to gather. And then your prior year's taxes. So if you're just starting out and you haven't filed your taxes, you need to make sure that you're eligible before you even, apply. Can I apply to this grant because I'm new and I don't have taxes yet, but I have a budget and I can give some information, right? And that might be okay. But also in terms of grant eligibility, when you're reading through the grants that you find, it may say you're not eligible to apply if you haven't been in business for 1 year, for 2 years, for 3 years. It might also restrict you and say, I've seen this before a dozen times. Sometimes I'll try to apply for grants and I'll see that you have to have a certain budget, or you should have brought in $300,000 last year, $500,000. I've even seen grants that say you can't apply unless your organization brings in $1 million each year. So be very, very focused on exactly what they need, because you might, start going through the process and then say, oh gosh, I didn't realize that I'm not even eligible. We don't even have this, this much money in our budget each year. So prior taxes that's always going to need to be uploaded into your grant portal. And I just see I'm going to go back to the chat. I have been seeing startup businesses with donation jars, and sometimes I donate, right, because you want them to succeed, without getting anything in return. Is this situation then called something else? I've seen it too. I mean, I think definitely some businesses are struggling, and I've seen local businesses, start GoFundMe pages, and maybe, in your case, like you're seeing a donation jar for startup businesses. If you're giving money, it's, it's great. It's out of the, goodness of your heart, but no, you're not going to get anything. And, I think what's more important to say is if you are donating and you don't know where the money's going to, hopefully, they're saying a startup business, but, are they really using it for that cause?
Yeah, no, I think the thing is that there are grants that do go to nonprofits. Unfortunately, they are few and far between, and the tools that we're going to be talking about are to find grants that are for nonprofits, 501c3s, and the like. The tools for finding grants for for-profit businesses it's a different thing, because and if you are a for-profit business, there are going to be less tools.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. If you are a for-profit business and you happen to be in the chat, or you're just interested in learning about it, there are grants. There's a lot of grants out there for new businesses and startups, but they're not easy to get, and they're completely different and require different things and have other restrictions. I also put down here, should I hire a grant writer? Because I meet with a lot of people, and it might be the founder of the nonprofit that I'm meeting with, and they say, I've never wrote a grant before. I don't know how to do it. give it a try. You know, if you're the founder of the organization, you should be able to do everything in the organization, right? So go in there and start applying. And then when you get busy and you can pass over that task to somebody else, right, then you can train them how to do it. Or you could pay for a grant writer. Now, there are several organizations that will help you with grant writing. Usually, they still charge something. Here in Westchester, there is something called Grant Writers of the Hudson Valley. And instead of charging like $100 an hour to write your grant, they might charge like 30 or 50. So it's they're a nonprofit actually themselves, but they do still charge for the service. And you know, grant writing again, it's not an easy thing, but it's also not hard if you're doing it as the founder. You know exactly what you do. You know what the mission is. You know what the organization is doing, what your programs are. So it should be easy for you to go in there. It's more the time, right? That you're, you know, maybe facilitating programs and, you know, working on the front lines, you know, doing, you know, grassroots kind of work. But you know, you should be able to write a few grants yourself before passing it along to somebody else in development. If you know, get that far and need to hire somebody. I also put here some online resources. Candid is probably the most popular one. There is also a fee for that, but maybe if you go to the library, you don't have to pay for Candid. That's also the Foundation Search website that you could use to.
Yeah, they I am not sure. Things are changing so
Yeah.
rapidly there.
Yeah.
We haven't even seen what the new version of Candid that they're going to be launching for libraries is going to involve. Candid does have a lot of free webinars. They are pretty much the go-to if you're trying to go and learn how to do fundraising or grant writing, and they do have librarians on board if you're trying to search for something and are unable to find it. I'm also going to go and put a link in the chat to the Nonprofit Help Desk, which is a Brooklyn-based organization that helps nonprofits get their stuff done. Sorry, I can't type and talk at the same time, but I'm going to go. So I'm going to go and be quiet and let you continue to present.
Yes, and we have another question in the chat. Can you be a nonprofit and charge? I would say yes to that, but there's, you know, again, also that but. So, you know, I've worked at the Women's Enterprise Development Center, and they do charge for some things. So their programs and services are, you know, mostly free, but if they have a networking event or if they have a very specific class that they're offering, there might be a fee for, you know, the people that they're helping, their members, you know, to attend. And usually it's low cost, you know, $15, $20, $25, something like that. But you need to, again, also include how that revenue is coming in. What is that, you know, that income that you're taking in? What is it and what is it being used for? I would tell you too that generally, you know, and broadly speaking, based on what your organization, what your nonprofit is, and what you're providing, right? Like most grantors are not going to want to support you if you're charging the people that you're, you know, helping, you know, X amount of dollars. So you have to really be careful. Like, what is it that you're charging, right? Like, think about summer camps. You know, summer camp could be $1,000 a week, right? But you're a nonprofit and you're going to instead charge children's come to camp, you know, $150 a week. Well, that's amazing, right? And that's amazing for any family over the summer. So you could get grants that are supplementing that. So hopefully that kind of answers your question. So really, it really does depend. Grant tracking and reporting. So let's say you're ready to press submit, right? You found the grant, you filled out all the information, you uploaded all of those important documents, and now you submit it. Well, keep a tracking document, right? There is a lot of software programs out there, and you'll probably see them online when you type in like grant tracking, but they're expensive. And for new nonprofits, I don't know if you'll have $500 to $3,000 a year for tracking software. And usually those are used when you have a lot of donations coming in each year, different monetary amounts. So I say, if you're new at this, just use a spreadsheet. Excel is, fine, anything that you want to use, right? And put down what grant you applied for, the date of when you applied, the amount, how much you applied for, and if there's, give yourself a notes section of, when are they saying that they're going to let us know, right? Sometimes you complete a grant and it submits and you're like, fingers crossed, and you're, sitting around for 6 weeks wondering. And some will tell you, we're making our decision by May 17th, right? So put that in there so you can track everything. I've unfortunately had a situation where I thought a grant went through and that portal just, shut down or didn't send the grant over. So, here we are, wondering what's happening, and the deadline is, approaching, and we sent an email and they didn't get the grant. It just didn't go through. So you want to make sure you have a good tracking system. And then when you get the grant, use that spreadsheet to list how much each grant, each grant is for. So if you got 5,000, 1,000 for another one. And again, like what am I using this for? What program is this for? Is it general operating expenses? Am I using it for a specific project or program? Put that in your report, in your tracking. Then we have reporting. That's something else, right? So I have here, create a calendar with deadlines, grant submission, impact reports, right? All of this is very important, because when you get that check in the mail, when they come and they present you with that big check, right, for $5,000, they want to know how you're going to use that. What are you going to use that money for? And they may want you to report on the data. So if you said, we'll go back to the, camp example. If you applied and you said, our goal is to, serve 100 students a week for summer camp, low cost summer camp, educational programs, arts, and, music, things like that. What are the numbers, right? At the end of summer camp, you're going to have numbers, right? It's important for you to record the data. How many students did you actually serve? What kind of programs and extracurricular activities did you offer at the camp? And then all that data goes into another portal that the grantor may have, or a form that you have to complete, or an email that you have to send, or a letter or report. They'll tell you exactly what they're going to need and when it's due. So keep that in mind. It's not just like, here's the money, bye, see you later, right? There might be other things, right? You have to include their logo on your marketing materials. They might want to come speak at something that you have, or, again, whatever, is before you sign, right? Whatever they require, make sure you have all of that information tracked, okay? How long do you have to use the funds? What data does the grant require? Same types of questions. So we talked a little bit about funding sources, government funds, partnerships, corporate donors, events, and sponsors. With corporate donors, government funds, and partnerships, usually this money is going to be very program specific. It may or may not include that you could use that money for tax, for rent, or for paying, salaries. With events and sponsorships, things get a little bit better, because that money is usually unrestricted, and we like that. We can use events and sponsorship monies for more things that we need. So I'll talk a little bit more about that now. In government, we have legislative grants. So again, like I said earlier, you can explore funding with your local and state elected officials. This requires you to, do that networking as, CEO, founder, executive director of your nonprofit organization. Make sure you know who all your elected officials are on both sides of the aisle, and make sure that you're introducing yourselves to them, they're getting your newsletter, whatever it is, however you can meet them and introduce yourself and what you're doing, in your community. And they'll let you know what grants you may be eligible for. In-kind donations, what are some other resources that your organization needs? Will product donations enhance and support your programming and services? Like I said earlier, whether you collect school supplies or food, what types of in-kind donations could you get if a corporation can't write you a check, but they can provide you with something else? Space, I always say space or storage because that's a struggle that we always have, and here in New York, especially with our locations in the city, it's very hard to find space and affordable space at that. So who can you partner with? Maybe there's another nonprofit organization that has a shared space you can use, co-working space, a school or another community group that maybe you can, barter with. And back to events, sponsorships from local businesses for galas, golf outings, and other fundraising events, silent and online auctions. We're doing an online fundraiser right now, which just kicked off like 2 or 3 days ago. And we use a program called GiveButter. It's givebutter.com. Finding that this program is very successful. There is a free option that you can use, like a free membership, and you're able to send out newsletters and create events online. People can purchase their tickets online. It could be an in-person event, but they can go online and purchase their ticket, and you don't have to pay for the program itself. You just would pay for whatever transaction fee, banking fee, to your bank account. So we're finding good luck with givebutter.com. And also connect with corporations that have philanthropic departments and charitable giving departments. The other thing I'll say with, events before I go to the next slide is don't think, especially now, let me tailor this by saying, years ago, when I first started the organization, we were able to do bigger galas, more, fancier type of events. These days, and again, it could be the industry that I'm into, but a lot harder. So don't always think that you have to throw this grand gala. You can have a luncheon, you can have a breakfast, a brunch, it doesn't have to be a golf outing. It could be, a shopping benefit or an event where you have speakers. And then you can, again, everybody's got a different nonprofit, but come up with tiered levels of sponsorship. And if, XYZ company gives $10,000, what are they getting? Are they getting to speak at the event? Are they getting media publicity? Are they getting, logo featured? Are they going to be featured in your newsletter? Things like that, right? What are the perks? Make sure you list all of that for each sponsorship level. And people ask me all the time, like, what's a good sponsorship level? Should I do 100, 500, and 1,000? Again, I can't answer that, but what is it that you need to make, right? What's the end goal for what you need to pay for? And who's your target market? Who are your donors, right? Let's put aside the people that we're serving right now, but who are the people most connected to your organization, to your mission, to your cause, right? That's your target demographic. These are the people that are going to come. And you need to think about what would they spend for a ticket? Would they spend $50? Would they spend $100? Would they spend $250 to come to your event, right? So again, you can have different levels for sponsorships, and you can even have different levels for tickets, right? This level ticket gets you this, friend, benefactor. I've seen so many different creative languages used for, tickets and sponsorship. So it's best to definitely search other organizations similar and not similar to yours and see what they're doing. And of course, you could always try a little bit of AI and ask Chat or Claude and see what they come up with for to help you with some sponsorship levels. And yes, I see in the chat here, Zeffy does the same as Give Butter with no fees for nonprofits. I don't know why I didn't like Zeffy. Maybe I'll go back to it and look again. I don't know if it was the platform, but I felt like I liked Give Butter a little bit more, maybe for what we're using it for. But whatever is, right for me might not be right for you. So yes, I would say research other platforms that maybe could be, helpful to your, virtual events and things like that. And virtual events are definitely a great way for you to raise a little bit of extra money. And let's think about additional fundraising opportunities. So unrestricted funds, individual, private donors and small businesses, wealth management like legacy gifts, life insurance, things like that. Online donations, fundraising platforms and website integrations. Another thing, that's popular, it's March right now, so it might not be on your radar, but one of the things that we do is Giving Tuesday, which is typically the Tuesday after Thanksgiving. And there's a big push in the nonprofit industry for, people to, donate on this Giving Tuesday. It's also good because it's, just before the end of the year. And if people or companies have a little extra money at the end and they want a tax, write off, then they could make a donation on Giving Tuesday. So we do Give Butter again for Giving Tuesday, but we also use Facebook and Instagram. So, don't be afraid to use Facebook and Instagram to help you with online donations. You can set up fundraisers, not just on Giving Tuesday, but anytime. If there's any particular, program that you have coming up, if there's something you really need, speaking of like unrestricted funds, something breaks. At my organization at Operation Prom, we're constantly replacing garment racks. Our garment racks fill up, and occasionally they get too heavy and they bend and they kind of break, even the most commercial grade ones. So sometimes we do like, little fundraising campaigns to say, hey, we need some more, dress racks. We need some mirrors, pop-up fitting rooms, things like that. And you'd be surprised, that, a few $100s, a couple of $1,000s, can go a long way, and it's all unrestricted when you're doing fundraising on these online platforms. So that's really nice. A little bit more, in a little bit more information in detail with wealth management. These are people who have maybe been long-time donors, right? And you have a good relationship with them, right? Part of donor management is making sure that when you get a donation, you're not taking it and walking away and never, talking to these people again, right? If somebody writes you a check, I don't care, again, if it's $10 or $100, but that you're engaging with them, right? You're retaining them as a donor. How are you doing that? What are the things that you do? Do you call them for their birthday? Do you have a personal relationship with them and go to an event when they invite you, right? Whatever it is, that long-term relationship could end up being, beneficial for the organization when it comes to, them thinking about a legacy gift or, making a contribution to you each year through their retirement plan. So there are definitely a lot of different ways that we can think about fundraising. It's just that, not every, fundraising activity is right for every organization. So any other questions before I go to the next slide? I'll pause for a minute.
There doesn't look like there's anything in the chat.
Okay. And if there is any, questions, back to grants, if you have any questions going back to grants, any other questions about fundraising platforms or, what I think maybe you should do in a certain situation, feel free to ask those questions. Going into more of like marketing, thinking about promoting your business, promoting your organization, because I think too, a lot of times when I speak to newer nonprofits, they're having difficulty with, getting the word out there about what they do. And sometimes it's, easy to think social media, I'm just going to post some pictures and say, I did this today. And that's good. That's not a bad thing, right? But think about it a little bit more, right? have a certain demographic that you're serving, and then you have a certain demographic that you're trying to attract, right? And you want to help build awareness to this mission, to this cause, by storytelling, essentially, is what you're doing, right? And that reader or that listener, that viewer, right? You want them to feel connected, right? So what are the things you can do to help them feel connected, where they say, okay, I'm going in my closet right now and I'm donating that dress, or I'm taking out my checkbook, I'm pulling out my credit card, and I'm going online and I'm making that contribution. So create a digital press kit is one of the things that we have at Operation Prom. We also have a one-page info sheet that we share. And that talks a little bit more about who we serve, and we talk a little bit about data, school districts, how many items we give away. Last year we piloted a program where we textile recycled garments that could not be dry cleaned, that were either damaged, they were donated to us, but they were unwearable. So we also started including on our annual reports that we textile recycled over 600 pounds of garments, right? And that's a good number to have. It's a good number to show. And somebody is going to read that and say, I like that. I like that they're just not throwing out things into the garbage and, it's ending up in our landfills. They're actually taking old dresses and, old tuxedos, and they're becoming a towel or a tablecloth, right? So it's about that connection right there that resonates with the person that's reading it. Website and social media, as I've said, right? Keep using those hashtags, tag other people, tag other groups, organizations. Whenever we have an Operation Prom event at a place, if we're, serving a certain school district, we're always tagging them, right? That's really, really important. And keeping things relevant and making sure that anything that you're posting with videos or photos, that you're sharing the impact, right? Put a quote in there, get a quote from somebody that you've helped, right? Talk about that story. And I think, you'll be pleasantly surprised on how many people are, looking to give back because they feel connected. We have a lot of people at Operation Prom that volunteer with us every year. And they volunteer because it does make them feel good that they're helping a student, but they never got to attend their prom. So they're giving back, and they're also, feeling, all those good feels of, helping that milestone moment happen for somebody else. So keep your volunteers in mind too. I mean, they're so valuable. They might not be able to write you a big check, but they might be the people that are, again, doing that, grassroots type of work where they're okay asking for money because they really believe in the mission. They're the people that show up. They're at your events. They're, supporting the people, the students, the animals, whatever it is that your organization serves. And they'll be the first ones to go to bat for you, sometimes even before your board members, but that's another story. But again, speaking of that, make sure that the board members that you're selecting have some ties to maybe some corporations or people that can help you and your mission and your organization grow, so you can make the impact that you intend to. Any other questions or thought? That's my last slide. And I will say this too, feel free to, email me if you have any specific questions. You can go to my website for some more information. I do have a YouTube channel with some other New York and Brooklyn Public Library videos that have been recorded. So if you want to go back and watch any of those, I do one that's all about starting a nonprofit and how to complete all the legal forms. So if you're in the beginning stages, that may also help you too.
And just a reminder,
Thanks, Jonathan.
the Macon branch of Brooklyn Public Library will be having their prom dress giveaway and tuxedo giveaway next month. I believe it's April 18th, and they will be there all day. So at Macon branch, which serves the Bed-Stuy community.
Yes, and I've met with Nicole virtually a few times, and it's going to be It's going to be a great event.
I'm really happy that the Brooklyn Public Library has been able to go and get involved and apologize because the central branch is under construction. If
Right.
any of you have been by the central branch, you know exactly how under construction it is. So we do the best we can. But we've got 62 branches. One of them absolutely was going to have room.
No, that's great. And yes, if anybody is listening, we have that event listed on our promnationalnetwork.org is our website. And if you go to the event tab, if you know any students that are looking for a free prom dress or tuxedo, you can see all the upcoming events that we have in New York City, in the Bronx, and in Westchester. Brooklyn, Queens, I think, is in 2 weeks. So there's a whole bunch of events listed on our website. And Egypt just had one question about what makes a good press kit. So what makes I like to do two things. So I like the impact report for the end of the year. So that's like a 1-sheet page, digital and print, that you can put all your statistics, a few pictures and numbers, right? Like bullet points, just a couple of things. And then your press kit's going to be a couple of more pages and in more detail where you could really explain the programs. So, if you have a website, maybe take some of the information from the website and include it in the press kit. Like, these are the programs that we offer. This is what we're looking for in terms of donations. Here are some of our volunteers at work, right? There's some pictures. So usually a good press kit is about 3 to 5 pages. Now, I've also seen at the end of press kits, which I like, that opportunity to sponsor something, right? So maybe you're not having an event right now, but maybe you want funding for your new classroom for something, right? Or maybe we're in healthcare, let's say, and we're looking for funding for certain, well, I guess I could say programs again, but something related to healthcare. List exactly what you're looking for, right? Put those monetary amounts on there, those different tiers, and say, with your contribution, with your donation of $500, we can do this, right? And be detailed. What can we buy? What can we give? Who can we help? And then what do they get in return? And that's where it goes into a little bit more of like, public relations thinking and marketing, but are they going to get their logo featured? Are they going to get to come to, this XYZ program and maybe speak or come see a photo opportunity?